we begin, a quick warning. Tennessee True Crime contains detailed descriptions and images of real-life violence. Some listeners and viewers may find the material deeply disturbing. This content is intended for mature audiences only. And remember, the goal of sharing these stories is not to sensationalize tragedy, but to honor the victims, understand the truth, and give voice to those who can no longer speak for themselves. This content is intended, again, for mature audiences only. Listener discretion is strongly advised. This show opening is brought to you by Namaste Wellness and Aesthetics. Visit Namaste for all of your skincare, weight loss, and primary care needs. The awesome ladies at Namaste are located right here in McMinnville at 159 Omni Drive. Now, on to the story. West Tennessee is the kind of place where the woods seem endless. Drive the back roads long enough and you'll see what I mean. Tall pines leaning over the road, long gravel driveways disappearing into the trees, homes that sit miles away from the nearest neighbor. Most mornings, it's quiet out there. So quiet that when something goes wrong, everybody hears about it. On April 13th, 2011, something went terribly wrong in the small community of Darden, Tennessee. A 20-year-old nursing student named Holly Bobo vanished from her family's home. Her brother saw a man in camouflage walking her into the woods. Moments later, she screamed, and then she disappeared. What followed would become one of the largest and most controversial criminal investigations in Tennessee history. Years of searching, rumors, confessions, redacted testimony, recanted testimony, and a murder trial that still sparks debate more than a decade later. This is the story of Holly Bobo. They say the South never forgets, and Tennessee, she remembers everything. Welcome to Tennessee True Crime, where the shadows of the volunteer state's past meet the stories that refuse to be forgotten. I'm your host, Tiffany Morgan. Each week, we dig into twisted tales of betrayal, violence, and mystery. The ones where whispers carry truth, and the answers are never as simple as they seem. Let's step into the dark and piece together the clues. Because in Tennessee, some secrets still haunt the hills. This is Tennessee True Crime.
Where the cold wind sighs, footsteps fall, where the moonlight hides, whispers over rivers, a secret lost in time. Welcome to Tennessee True Crime.
So before we talk about the crime, I think it's important to understand who Holly was. Holly Ann Bobo grew up in a small community near Darden in Decatur County, Tennessee. It's a quiet area not far from the Tennessee River, the kind of place where families have known each other for generations. Holly was known as a kind and hardworking young woman. Friends described her as caring and soft-spoken and incredibly close with her family. She had big plans for her future. She had a beautiful voice. Holly was studying nursing at the University of Tennessee at Martin. Her dream was simple. She wanted to help people. Her mother, Karen, once described her as someone who would always stop to help anyone in need. She loved music. She loved being outdoors. She loved her boyfriend, Drew Scott, who had recently given her a promise ring. And she loved her family, which is what makes what happened next so difficult to understand. Because Holly disappeared from the very place that she should have been safest, her home. April 13th, 2011 was a morning that started like any other. Holly was getting ready to leave for school. She had gotten up at around 4:30 that morning to study. Her mom packed her lunch, kissed her goodbye before she left for work. Everything was normal. Her brother Clint was home as well. He was still waking up, moving slowly through the quiet of the morning. Then the dogs start barking. It was enough to catch his attention. So Clint walked to the window and glanced outside. Now, near the carport, he saw Holly standing there, and standing with her was a man dressed in camouflage. From where Clint stood, he couldn't make out the man's face, but in small-town West Tennessee, that alone was not enough to raise alarm. This was hunting country. Seeing somebody in camouflage, especially in the morning hours, was completely normal. People checked trail cameras, fed deer, or headed into the woods before the day even really began. So Clint made an assumption. He believed that it was Holly's boyfriend, Drew Scott. Now, at first, nothing really seemed out of place. He turned away from the window and went back to getting ready, not wanting to bother them because it seemed like they were fussing. Now, Clint would later say that from his perspective, it looked like a tense conversation, possibly even a breakup. So he wasn't about to interfere with that, and it was nothing urgent yet enough for him to feel like he needed to act on anything. He did call his mom, Karen Bobo, who was at work at Scotts Hill Elementary, and he asked her, hey, did Holly decide not to go to school today? Is she going to spend the day with Drew? Like, what's going on? Because this is not normal for her to not be gone at this point. Now, at that point, Clint mentioned what he had seen and that Holly was outside near the carport with the man in camouflage. They're walking towards the woods, and then there's a pause. And then his mom, Karen, said something that changed everything. Clint, that is not Drew. Go get a gun and shoot him. Clint is still confused, still a little groggy. He's just waking up, and he's trying to process what she's saying. Like, you want me to shoot Drew? What? But Karen already knew. Earlier that morning, Drew had gone to her mom's property to hunt turkeys, so there was no way that he could be at that house. The man with Holly was not who Clint thought. By the time that call ended, Holly and the man in camouflage had disappeared into the woods near a logging road. Armed with his pistol, Clint had ran into the woods behind the house, hoping that he might still be able to catch up to them. But the woods are thick. There's no sign of Holly, no sign of the man. She's just gone. After searching briefly, Clint returns to the house, and within minutes, of course, law enforcement begins to arrive because Karen immediately had dialed 911 to report her daughter's abduction. Somebody has my daughter. Get there now. So Karen left work, and Dana, who is Holly's dad, met her at the house, and they immediately start looking for Holly. Now, at UT Martin, her classmates and instructor were waiting for Holly. It was super unusual for her not to be there, and no one had spoken to her for any news to be relayed that she was running behind or wouldn't be there. There was an important test that day in class, and the instructor even delayed the starting time for the class just to give Holly more time to get there because it was so out of pocket for her. Now, eventually, someone let them know that something terrible had happened. What had started as an ordinary morning had turned into the beginning of one of Tennessee's most haunting cases. The first deputies on scene quickly realized something serious had happened. Near the carport, where Holly had been standing with the man, they discovered troubling evidence. It was blood. And it was not a super small amount, not a few small drops. There were small pools of blood on the ground that led them to believe there had been a struggle. So police began their search in the direction where Holly was last seen walking, but ultimately found nothing. The following day, the search continued. Now, word spread quickly through Decatur County, as it does in a small place. A young woman had been taken from her home in broad daylight. People across the community started showing up to help search. Friends of the Bobo family, local church members, hunters who were familiar with the woods. Search teams began forming, and groups of those volunteers lined up shoulder to shoulder, walking slowly through the forest, looking for any sign of Holly. Neighbors and friends, even strangers, began combing through the nearby woods and fields. And soon the search grew massive. Helicopters circling overhead, search dogs tracking scents through the trees. ATVs moved through hunting trails and back roads. It would eventually become one of the largest search operations in Tennessee history. But despite the effort, there was no sign of Holly. Investigators immediately faced several questions. Who was the man in camouflage? Did Holly know him? Was this a random abduction or something planned? I mean, Clint could only provide a very limited description, guessing that he was around 5'10" to 6 foot, around 200 pounds, and that's about it. Now, in a little county where half the men owned camouflage clothing, that description didn't narrow things down much. Although there was no luck locating Holly, they did begin finding objects that belonged to her. A team of searchers eventually discovered Holly's lunchbox, along with a few other personal belongings in a nearby creek. At the same time, additional items began turning up in different areas around town. Her cell phone, a school card, some homework, even a receipt bearing her name and address. They were scattered and out of place and very unsettling. One person wondered if Holly was able to throw stuff out as she was going just to leave small clues. But despite the significance of the finds, none of these items provided investigators with clear answers or led them any closer to Holly's whereabouts. These discoveries did, however, change the entire direction of the investigation, because what began as a missing persons case was now quickly being treated as a possible abduction. Agents from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation were called in, and the property quickly became an active crime scene. Tape went up, investigators photographed everything, and the search for Holly Bobo strengthened. Investigators began collecting tips, as they do, and boy, did the tips start pouring in. Hundreds of them, then thousands of them. Some, of course, would lead nowhere, but others would point investigators toward people who would soon become the center of the case. Now, if you've lived in small-town Tennessee, you know how close communities like this are. When something like this happens, everybody feels it. Parents start watching their kids a little closer. People start locking doors when they've never locked them before. And rumors, boy, do the rumors start spreading fast. Now, within days of Holly's disappearance, investigators were already hearing names. Names connected to drugs, names connected to crime, names that would eventually dominate the case for years to come. But that moment, on that April morning, all anyone knew was this: Holly Bobo had walked into the woods with a man in camouflage, and she had never come back. Investigators initially believed that Holly might still be alive somewhere. Maybe she had been kidnapped. Maybe she was being held nearby. The search intensified even more. But as days turned into weeks, the hope of finding Holly alive began to fade, and investigators would soon begin uncovering stories and confessions, ones that would lead them deep into the dark underbelly of small-town West Tennessee. It was a massive search effort for Holly Bobo, and there were suspects whose names kept coming up again and again. And the deeper investigators look, the stranger the case became, because the rumors coming out of Decatur County were pointing towards something darker than a random abduction, much darker. Investigators collected the blood evidence and the personal items believed to belong to Holly, as well as documenting footprints near the edge of the woods. Neighbors were questioned, drivers on nearby roads were stopped, but no one had seen anything suspicious. And that news, again, spread quickly. Local media began covering the story nonstop, and soon national headlines picked it up as well. The idea that a young woman could be abducted from her own home in broad daylight shocked people across the country. Volunteers continued to pour into Decatur County, but with no success. So, investigators go back to the beginning. And everything investigators knew about the suspect came from one person, Holly's brother, Clint Bobo. Clint told investigators again, "I saw a man in camouflage walking Holly toward the woods. He wasn't dragging her. He wasn't pulling her. He never saw the man's face clearly. And he never saw a weapon that he could say for certain, just that he was carrying a black object." That created a very confusing picture for investigators. So Holly wasn't being forced. Did she know the man and go with him willingly? Some investigators began considering the possibility that Holly probably recognized the person who took her. And if that is true, it meant the suspect could be someone from their local community. And then came the theories. Theory 1 was that Holly had been abducted by a stranger, a random crime. But as time passed and they find out she wasn't being dragged or forced to walk, that theory seemed less likely. There were no reports of suspicious vehicles leaving the area, no witnesses seeing someone fleeing the scene. Another theory was that someone Holly knew might be involved, someone familiar with the area, someone who understood how remote the property was, someone who really knew Holly's routine, someone who shared a home with her. Investigators start looking at Clint, Holly's brother. And for a while, that theory starts gaining traction among investigators. They check Clint's computer. They monitor his phone calls. They check his body for scratches or bruises or injuries. And then they polygraph him, not once, but twice. Eventually, Clint is cleared, and investigators turn to a man named Terry Britt. So Terry was a registered sex offender who lived near where a lot of Holly Bobo's items were found. The path that Holly's phone had actually taken was like a semicircle around his house. Now, Terry Britt is said to be a horrible human being. According to police, he has spent lots of time, the majority of his life even, in prison for rape and kidnapping. And as if those things didn't raise suspicions, another red flag for Britt, his alibi did not check out. His physical description also matches that of the one that Clint Bobo gave, around 5'10" to 6 foot and about 200 pounds. So, police get a search warrant for Terry Britt's house. And wouldn't you know it, the cadaver dogs alert to not one, but 2 of Terry Britt's vehicles, and alerted to some tools laying around the house, an axe, a shovel, which means there has been decomposition in and around those things. After DNA testing, though, nothing. Wiretaps and bugs were placed, but they did not give the results that police wanted. So when people hear this, they count Terry Britt out. Okay, he didn't do it. It's just a fluke. However, the lead investigator, Terry Dacus, had a chilling conversation with Britt. And while the wiretaps weren't fruitful, This conversation you're about to hear with investigator Dacus kept him interested in Terry.
She's young, pretty, perfect, somewhat body.
Yeah.
Okay, like a toy. He can't wait to get her to wherever he's going to take her to because he's wanting that body. But here comes reality. Now I've got a body. What am I going to do with it? If you keep it, you got to feed it. You got to hide it. And if you kill it, what are you going to do with it?
So Dacus says in his mind, it is clear that Terry Britt is reliving in his mind when he's talking about this. And he even switches from calling Holly a she to an it when he's talking about her no longer being alive. So Agent Dacus feels like, okay, this is solid. We're onto something. But others in the TBI don't agree. So from what Agent Terry Dacus says, it's not all of them who don't agree, but the so-called right ones didn't. So then they feel Terry Dacus has fallen into tunnel vision, and get this, they remove him from the case. Now, eventually, he just leaves the TBI altogether, frustrated to say the least. And guess what? After that, the case stalls. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and still no sign of Holly. So for the Bobo family, as you can imagine, if this was your child, the waiting was unbearable. Karen Bobo made repeated public appeals for information. Holly's brother Clint spoke to the media, urging anyone who knew something to just please come forward. The reward for information grew larger, but even with the increased attention, the case seemed stuck. Now, eventually, investigators began receiving information from jailhouse informants. Now, their testimony can sometimes help solve cases, but it also comes with very serious risks because inmates often have something to gain from providing information. They get reduced sentences, perhaps, better treatment, or even drop charges. In the Holly Bobo investigation, several inmates began claiming that they had heard confessions from suspects. Not a suspect, suspects. Others told investigators about alleged conversations involving Holly's murder. Investigators, of course, began documenting these statements. Several names began coming up repeatedly in tips, and among them were men known locally for criminal activity. And those names would become central to this investigation. Zachary Adams and his brother Dylan Adams, as well as Jason Autry and his cousin Shane Austin. Now, at first, these names are just rumors, but when investigators hear the same names coming up in tip after tip after tip, they follow through. At the time, it seemed like the first real breakthrough in the case after hearing bogus claims that she was in a well or some man had her tied up in his basement and a woman claiming she was there when everything happened. Zach Adams was another one running his mouth about the case, but he wasn't saying that he was there or that he chained her up. He was saying things like, "You're going to end up in a hole just like Holly." And law enforcement weren't the only ones hearing things. So were the Bobos. And in true Mama Bear fashion, Holly's mother went straight to the source. She sought out each of these guys that were supposedly involved in this, went to their houses and asked them directly about their involvement, which, of course, I mean, even if they did it, they denied it to her face. So while investigators chase those leads and follow up more thoroughly and on the record, Terry Dacus, who had talked to those men before he was off the case, had gotten their alibis. And guess what? They check out. They have solid alibis. They were not there at the time that Holly was taken and murdered. So the community around Decatur County is changing, and people are afraid. They're, again, locking their doors. The disappearance of Holly Bobo had shaken the sense of safety that many people felt in that quiet little town. And the longer the case went unsolved, the more the tension grew. Finger pointing started. Some people believed law enforcement is closing in on suspects, and others believed the real story had not yet been uncovered. But one thing was certain. This case was far from over. For 3 long years, Holly Bobo's family waited. My computer's messed up on me here. And then, in September of 2014, the case took a devastating turn because deep in the woods of Decatur County, 2 men hunting for ginseng made a discovery that would change everything. Now, ginseng hunting, if you haven't heard of it before, is common across parts of Tennessee, Appalachia. My cousin used to do it in Kentucky. The root is valuable and grows wild in shaded woodland areas. So as the men moved through the trees, they noticed something unusual on the ground: human bones. They immediately contacted authorities, and investigators from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation responded quickly. The area was secured as a potential crime scene, and forensic teams began carefully examining the site. And what they found was very disturbing. Scattered human remains, clothing fragments, personal items. It quickly became clear this is not some ancient burial site. These remains are fairly recent. Investigators collected those remains, including a skull, and transported them for forensic analysis. Dental records would soon provide the confirmation that Holly's parents had waited for, but also dreaded. The remains belonged to Holly Bobo. After 3 years of uncertainty, the case was now officially a homicide investigation. Now, for Holly's family, this news is devastating. The possibility, even the smallest inkling that she might still be alive, was gone. But at the same time, investigators believed that the discovery might finally help them identify the people responsible, because the location of the remains raised immediate questions. The site where Holly was found was at the bottom of a cell tower located in Decatur County. It was not far from properties connected to individuals who had already been on investigators' radar. For 3 years, that case had haunted West Tennessee. I mean, investigators had searched thousands of acres of land. Volunteers had combed through forest and creek beds. Tips had poured in from across the county and across the country. 3 years. For her family, every day had been a mixture of hope and of fear. That small hope that Holly might still be alive somewhere, and fear that the truth would eventually be something worse, which it was. And after 3 years, the mystery of what happened to Holly was still only just beginning. With Holly's remains now discovered, investigators began re-examining everything they had learned over the previous 3 years. They reviewed their witness statements and the jailhouse informant reports and tips from the public and interviews with known suspects. And still those statements pointed them toward the same group of men who lived in the surrounding area, men who had reputations involving the drugs and the theft and the violent behavior, which again was Zachary Adams, Dylan Adams, Jason Autry, and Shane Austin. But they still needed evidence. During the investigation, several individuals began telling authorities disturbing stories about Holly's disappearance, and some claimed that they had heard details from those very suspects, and others said they had been present when the parts of the crime occurred. And so, to try to get to the bottom of things, they start questioning these people. Investigators bring in Dylan Adams, who is Zach's brother. Now, Dylan is said to have intellectual disabilities, but they continue on with questioning anyway. Through the course of that interview, Dylan's story changed several times. He said the 4 men all took Holly, and then all 4 men raped her at Zach's house. And then in one version of the story, Zach killed Holly, and in the other one, Jason Autry did it. I mean, police quickly realized that Dylan would not make a very good witness, and they just continue on with what little he has given them, and he couldn't really give them any specific or reliable details on anything. And also, when they pushed him in the video of his interrogation, I mean, he just folds. So it's just not a very stable confession. They next turn to Shane Austin, and they offer him immunity in exchange for his testimony. But before he can testify, after the remains are found, he hangs himself in a Florida hotel room. So here we are again. Investigators are stuck. And through all of this evidence found, the school stuff, the lunchbox, the cell phone, some of her clothes, not a single bit had linked Zach, Dylan, Jason, or Shane to the crime. The closest thing so far is that her remains were found at the base of that cell tower just 6 miles from Zach Adams' house. But it's that close or less to Terry Britt's house. Indictments were handed down nonetheless, and this really makes me scratch my head because they have nothing. If anything, they have more on Terry Britt, and they still indict these, 3 men now because, Shane killed himself. And all of the men plead not guilty. But in a small town, some people think that once indictments are handed down, you're as good as guilty. Hang them all now. But there was one man who didn't quite buy into that. One man who knows that evidence should carry weight. One man who feels that investigators are heading in the wrong direction. Remember the former lead agent, Terry Dacus? Yeah, he's not buying into it just yet. So the stage is set for a trial that would captivate the state of Tennessee. By 2017, 6 years after Holly Bobo disappeared into the woods behind her home, the case finally reached a courtroom. Now, the trial would last for weeks. Jurors would hear graphic testimony, witnesses would describe horrifying events, and prosecutors would argue that they had finally solved one of Tennessee's most infamous crimes. But as the trial unfolded, questions began to emerge about the reliability of witnesses. Questions that would only grow louder in the years after the verdict, because some of the people who helped convict Zach Adams would later say something shocking. Hey, I lied. So let's relive the inside of the courtroom for the trial of Zach Adams and explore the testimony that convinced a jury to send him to prison for life. Now, prosecutors believe we've finally figured it out. We've uncovered what happened on that April morning in 2011. And inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense, to say the least. Members of Holly's family were present, of course. So were reporters from across the state. And sitting at the defense table was Zachary Adams, the man that prosecutors said was responsible for Holly's kidnapping and murder. Zach Adams pleaded not guilty, along with his brother Dylan and Jason Autry. Heck, Jason Autry had shouted his innocence from the rooftops for anyone that would listen, saying, all of them, hey, we had nothing to do with this. Now, Zach Adams' defense team argued that the prosecution's case was built on unreliable witnesses and speculation. But prosecutors were confident. They believed the testimony of their witnesses would tell the jury exactly what had happened. So prosecutors lay their case out early. They argue that on April 13th, 2011, Zach Adams abducted Holly Bobo from her home. According to prosecution, Adams forced Holly into the woods behind her house. From there, they claimed she was taken to another location. Now, witnesses would later testify that Holly was sexually assaulted and murdered, shot in the back of the head. Now, the gun, they had recovered one, rusted and not of any good use at this point, from a drainage ditch, a gun that had once belonged to Shane Austin, a gun that no one could say shot the bullet that killed Holly Bobo. And the admissions, quote unquote, from Dylan Adams, well, the prosecution doesn't use them at all. They don't even put him on the stand. So who do they put on the stand? Well, Jason Autry, who had been indicted on the same crime. And guess what? All of a sudden, even though for 6 years he'd been saying they had nothing to do with this, completely flips the script and sings like a bird on Zach Adams. I find that odd. He says the morning that Holly was killed, Zach Adams had asked him to help dispose of a body that was wrapped up in a quilt in the back of his pickup truck. He even says, hey, it's Holly Bobo. Now, Jason said that him and Zach drove the truck under a bridge down by the Tennessee River, and they took the body out and laid it on the ground. Now, Jason says when they took it out and laid it on the ground, he hears this noise like a moan and then sees the foot move and says to Zach, hey, whoa, she's still alive. So then Zach gets the pistol out of the truck and shoots Holly. They load the body back up and then they leave. Let me ask you, why in the world are you laying the body out on the ground, then you find out it's still alive, supposedly, and then you shoot the body and you came there to dispose of the body, but then you decide, let's just put the body back in the truck and dispose of it somewhere else. It's not making any sense to me. But, you know, his details and his story were immaculate. But that's where his involvement ends, allegedly. He said he learned later from Zach and Dylan that they, along with Shane Austin, had abducted her and raped her in an old barn. Now, Zach Adams' attorney doesn't quite buy into all of this, same, and questions Jason Autry about chatting it up on the phone with his girlfriend and his mom while a murder is happening right there in front of him, because phone records say that's exactly what he was doing. He was on the phone with his mom and he was on the phone with his girlfriend at one point when this is supposed to be happening. So Autry had initially denied involvement in the crime. His story changed multiple times before he agreed to testify, and defense attorneys argued that Jason Autry has a strong motivation to cooperate with prosecutors because by testifying, they tell him, you won't get a life sentence. So can you really take into account what he's saying? Specifically because he's been saying for 6 years, this is where I was, the alibi checks out, I had nothing to do with it, I just don't understand. Anyway, The prosecution described the crime as brutal and senseless, which it was. But the evidence tying anyone directly to the crime scene was none. There was none. And what was the motive? Which one of the men specifically took her? There's no DNA placing any one of them at the Bobo home. No fingerprints. Why did they choose her? Now, instead of answering these questions, prosecutors relied on testimony from individuals who claimed to have heard Zach bragging about it. And I mean, they brought out a whole host of characters, a parade of local mugshots right there in living color, each living out their little 15 minutes of fame while the news channels are rolling the cameras and telling what they heard Zach Adams say. Which, I'm sorry, bragging about a crime does not equal guilt. Do you know how many people have bragged about crimes that they have not committed? And yes, it's nutso, but people do it all the time. So, as we talked about with the jailhouse informants, some had received benefits from prosecutors in exchange for their cooperation. Defense attorneys argue, hey, these witnesses are not reliable. They suggested the stories were fabricated or exaggerated. But again, Zach Adams' defense team focused on one central argument. There is no physical evidence tying Zach Adams to the crime. No DNA, no forensic evidence, and much of the case depended on testimony from people with incentives to lie. The defense also argued that investigators had focused on Adams too early and built their case around that assumption rather than digging deeper into other alternatives. And how strange the karma that TBI is now accused of tunnel vision when they upended an investigation headed into another direction with more evidence accusing former Agent Dacus of the very same thing. And what about that other man who has histories of kidnaps and rapes, Terry Britt? Well, they put him on the stand too, in his jailhouse blues. And what was he in jail for, you ask? Well, take a guess. Kidnap and attempted rape. So Zach Adams' defense attorney talked about Terry Britt's greeting to law enforcement when they showed up at his door. His first words to law enforcement, "I didn't rape nobody." That's not suspicious at all. And how odd that the prosecutors are essentially trying to prove Terry Britt's innocence of kidnapping, raping, and murdering Holly Bobo by telling the jury there's no physical evidence linking Terry Britt to the murder. Hello? There's no evidence linking Zach Adams either. Now, former lead agent Terry Dacus testified as well, saying the strongest indicator that others are overlooking is the non-existent alibi for Terry Britt. It was a complete lie. As well as the cadaver dogs hitting on his cars and tools, and also the obvious issue that he is a repeat rapist and kidnapper. I mean, he came to testify in court while he's incarcerated for the very same thing. Again, reasonable doubt, people. I struggle with the idea that there can be no evidence and somehow you still end up indicted and on trial for murder, while other people confess to murder and attempted murder, and there's a mountain of evidence, and those people get out on May 2nd. I'm looking at you, Mr. Waldrop. But here we are. Zach Adams is found guilty and sentenced to life with no parole plus 50 years. Think this is the end of the story? Oh no. Part 2 will be out next week. Now, we've made it from the disappearance to the initial trial, but there is so much more to come. I'll see you next time, friends. This episode, Into the Woods, Part 1, was written and hosted by me, Tiffany Morgan, and produced by Main Street Media. Background music and theme song by John T. Productions. Research support from Court Archives, ABC News, and Fox News. This finale was brought to you by the wonderful folks at Jones & Company Real Estate. If you are buying or selling a home, we would love to visit with you. Come by and see us at 304 Mulliken Street or give us a call at 931-474-2020. There is a wonderful team of qualified and friendly realtors ready to go to work for you. And if you would like to sponsor an episode, we would love to partner with you. Our sponsors keep our shows funded and running. To support Tennessee True Crime, follow us on Facebook at Tennessee True Crime or Instagram at TN True Crime. You can find case and evidence photos on those socials. We are also now on Spotify and most other streaming platforms. Give us a follow and please leave a rating after you listen. Now, if you have a case that you're interested in me covering, please feel free to email me at tntruecrime@mainstreetmedia.llc. Join me next week as we continue this Tennessee case that is still leaving a mark. Because here in Tennessee, we never stop telling the stories that matter. And some secrets we refuse to let stay buried. Tune in next time on Tennessee True Crime.
Down through the smoky hollers where the cold wind sighs, footsteps fall where the moonlight hides, whispers over rivers, a secret lost in time. Welcome to Tennessee. True crime. Dark tales in the mountains where the mist won't